Hello and welcome to my Introduction to Dungeons guide for World of Warcraft. This video is aimed primarily at new players that have little to no experience in dungeons and groups. Because of this, I will be focusing mostly on the basics of dungeons and group interactions and leaving advanced mechanics and strategies for later videos. Listed on your screen at the moment is every category that I plan to cover in this video, so feel free to skip ahead to any time point that you feel that you'll get the most out of the information. There are several ways to get a group in World of Warcraft. The easiest and often the fastest is to use the built-in Dungeon Finder tool. You can access the Dungeon Finder tool by clicking on the green circle icon on your main menu found here, or you can hit the I key on your keyboard. Your Dungeon Finder tool will look a lot like this. At the top you will find where you can select your role that you would like to play in the group. Below that you will find a drop-down menu where you can select one of the dungeons that is currently available for your level, or you can choose to leave it random and let the game decide for you. If you choose to leave your dungeon choice random, at the end of the dungeon you will be presented with an experience reward, extra money, and extra loot. At higher levels you are presented with points that are like a currency that you can exchange for some of the best gear available. Here's an example. I'm on my shaman at the moment and I'm about to select a DPS role for a random dungeon. After I've selected the role that I'd like, I hit the Find Group button at the bottom of the Dungeon Finder tool. The game is now searching for 4 other players that are also looking for a group at the moment. You can find the status of how many players it has found by looking at the same green icon around your minimap in the top right hand of your screen. This icon is only displayed around your minimap when you are currently looking for a group, and you can also mouse over it to see what the estimated time is before your dungeon is ready. It's also important to know that you can queue for a dungeon almost anywhere, and as you can see here, you can also continue doing other things while you're waiting. When the rest of your group has been found, you'll be notified on screen and teleported directly to the dungeon after hitting the Enter Dungeon button. Groups are comprised of 5 party members, 1 tank, 1 healer, and 3 DPS. Even though it is likely that you will only be filling one of these roles when you first start doing dungeons, it is important for you to understand how all 3 operate in order for your group to be successful. You should also know that certain roles can only be filled by certain classes, so your options may be limited depending on what class you currently are. First up is the tank. Only Death Knights, Druids, Paladins, and Warriors can select this role in the Dungeon Finder tool. Tanks focus on defense instead of offense with the goal in mind to be able to take the most amount of damage without dying. These defensive capabilities are required for tanks to survive in situations that other group members would die in. Tanks also have offensive capabilities, but these are mostly focused on generating threat. Threat can be quite a complicated topic that really deserves its own video to go in depth with, but for now, let's just look at it as threat making enemies angry. Here is an example of a tank's defensive capability and threat mechanics working in a dungeon. The high threat abilities that I'm using against the boss are making him very angry at me and focusing solely on me even though I'm not doing the most damage to him. Another way of looking at it is that my abilities are tricking the boss into thinking that I am the biggest threat to him at the moment, when in reality it's the damage dealers that are killing him and not me. Defensive capabilities are also in play here. If this boss was hitting a damage dealer instead of me, he could probably kill him in a couple of hits, where it's taking many more to kill me. This gives the healer time enough to actually cast heals on me to keep me alive, whereas if a damage dealer was taking those hits, he would die so quickly that he could not be healed, but I'll get to healing in just a second. Tanks are also responsible for one more important thing, and that is initiating combat, or as it's also known as, pulling. It is referred to as this because after starting combat with enemies, tanks usually pull the enemies back from their starting position so a safe distance is passed between them and the next group, so there is no danger of accidentally grabbing more enemies in the middle of combat. It is for this reason that tanks are usually expected to lead, because they're expected to know where to go since they are always the ones that start combat with the enemies. The role of the healer can be filled by druids, paladins, priests, and shaman. This role is also the least like playing by yourself in a solo environment because you will be dealing no damage to enemies and focusing solely on the other members of your group. This shift in focus is important to remember if you want to be a successful healer. Your main job is to look at the health bars of the members in your group and keep them alive by casting healing spells on them and not focusing on the enemies. Primarily, your job is to keep the tank alive, although the members of the group will also need heals depending on the fights that you are doing. Here is an example of me healing a group on my shaman. Here you can see us moving around the dungeon and the tank has just pulled a group of enemies. Most of my attention at this point is focused on the top of my screen where his health bar is. Whenever he takes damage, I begin to cast a heal on him to make sure he doesn't die. This tank is pretty good and is keeping most of the damage on himself. This means he is taking less damage than a DPS would, which means it's easier to heal him, although I do believe that the rogue here takes a stray hit, which means I do have to throw a heal on him as well, but it's only the one heal that is off the tank for this entire pull. As you can see, healing is a little different from dealing damage, and I spend most of my time reacting to what the enemies are dealing to my group instead of dealing damage back at them. Next up is a boss encounter where you will see why it is very important to have a healer in your group. The tank runs in and begins the fight by generating threat on the boss. He also starts taking incoming damage from the boss and requires immediate healing. Bosses tend to hit incredibly hard, and without a healer in the group, the tank would die before the damage dealers get a chance to kill the boss. Another way of looking at a boss encounter is a race. It is a race for the damage dealers to kill the boss before the boss does so much damage to the tank that the healer runs out of mana or cannot heal him anymore. Although the damage dealers are doing most of the work in actually killing the boss, without a tank around, the boss would quickly kill all the damage dealers, and in addition, without a healer around, the tank would die too quickly for the damage dealers to actually kill the boss. It is in this way that all 5 members of the group work together to eventually overcome the boss that they would not be able to have done alone. Last up are damage dealers. Every class in the game has a way to fill this role, and there are 3 damage dealers in each group. Being a DPS is the easiest role to fill because it is almost identical to what you would be normally doing in the game if you weren't in a group, dealing damage to enemies and trying to kill them. The goal of the DPS is to do the most damage possible while taking the least amount of damage possible. The faster the enemies die, the faster you can progress through the dungeon and get more rewards. The less damage that you take, the more the healer can focus on the tank and has more mana at the end of battles to be able to take more enemies. Another key to being a good DPS is to understand how tanking and threat works. DPS have a threat component to their damage as well, although it is significantly less than what a tank can generate. That said, if a DPS does pull before a tank, or starts DPSing too quickly, that can result in pulling off the tank and making the tank's job very difficult. Always make sure that the tank is initiating all combat and never pull in front of the tank. Another way that DPSing in a group differs from DPSing by yourself is the use of area of effect spells. These abilities can hit multiple targets at once, and since most enemies in dungeons come in groups, you can deal damage to all of them simultaneously and kill them faster. One thing to note about this is that if your tank is struggling with generating threat on multiple targets at once, that it is probably best that you switch to single targeting enemies down that the tank is on at the moment. A good way to check if you are about to pull threat off an enemy is to look above the enemy's action bar at the top of your screen pointed here. This is a percentage that is displayed, and when that percentage reaches 100%, you will pull from the tank, and the enemy will try to kill you instead because he is now more angry at you than the tank. Although I will cover more advanced tactics for DPS in later videos, in general, you want to move out of any damaging graphical abilities on your screen, as these will cause extra damage to you and the healer will have to focus on you instead of the tank. Also, if you have an interrupt, try and use it whenever you see your enemy has a cast bar. I think that's about all the basics that I wanted to cover for this video. If you're looking for more advanced information, including heroics, please look out for later videos. Considering this is the first video that I've ever made, any comments, suggestions, and especially feedback is welcome below. Thank you for watching, and I hope this was informative for at least 1 or 2 people out there.